Thank you all so much for being here today, this afternoon, and for joining us. I was really looking forward to welcoming you all in Paris, but I'm also really grateful that all people involved, all speakers, the scientific committee, the keynote have been very accommodating and very flexible when it came to moving online. And I'm really thankful for that, and enthusiastic about the opportunities that the new online environment brings to us. These are certainly times that call for great adaptation. And so I'm really thankful to all of you for having proven your absolute best flexibility skills. In times of lockdown and social distance, it has also been very heartwarming to have the support of the very dear friends and colleagues who make up the scientific committee. So a very special thank you goes to Esteban, to Gasia, to Chrissy, to Joe, and to Justinien. The event of this conference, Urban Nostalgia, is funded by the Aural Paris project that I lead in Paris, which is based at the Centre de Recherche sur les Arts et le Langage, the CRAL, a lab within the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. So I would also like to thank both the CRAL and the EHESS for the institutional and administrative support. And I hope everybody who's connecting either via Zoom or via Facebook is well, is safe and sound. And I cannot tell you how exciting it's been to see the registrations and the inscriptions popping in my inbox ever since the event was announced. So thank you all for that as well. It's been a real pleasure to direct and convene this event that has been on my mind since I think at least 2016, when I co-founded and co-directed the Urban Rhythms Network at the University of Oxford. And this event, Urban Nostalgia, is the meeting of different interests that I've developed over the years, such as site specificity in the arts, sonic ecology, sound mapping, psychogeography, all within the broad theme of sound and space, which I'm now merging with nostalgia, which is a subject that I first became interested in when researching regionalism and nationalism in relationship to sound maps and sound map making, and also in another parallel project dealing with reactionary cultural politics in French interwar art. And all of these strands now have provided the basis for the rationale of this conference, as well as for the book that I'm writing about Parisian musical landscapes during the Third Republic and the role of music, literature, and film in the shaping of a Parisian urban identity. Now, please, I would ask you to allow me in the next 15 minutes or so to briefly recall with very broad brushstrokes some of the main themes in nostalgia studies and to present the rationale of the conference. I think given how 2020 has started, nostalgia is for us an unavoidable subject. The daily news is now brimming with nostalgia. During lockdown, we've read headlines such as how teenagers in the age of leaving school who missed the physical experience of that last year regret not having been able to collect or to make memories of what they think is the most important years of their lives. So in that sense, we could say that they are nostalgic. Teenagers into 2020 are nostalgic for nostalgia of all of the what ifs, what could have happened if normality had kept its pace. On the other hand, related to nostalgia in our present times is the question of those voices that are currently asking to make their countries great again, whenever that supposed era of greatness was supposed to happen. Such a strategy is based on myth, if we consider that a myth is that story which has lost its historical aura. We don't quite know when it happened or even when it ended, which is one that some people wanted back. And as so many folk tales begin, that era of greatness happened once upon a time. Then against the nostalgia of white privilege, which is at the most dangerous end of the reactionary spectrum of all of the emotional nuances of nostalgia, is the Black Lives Matter movement, which has powerfully drawn new red lines on the maps of our cities. Statues that until now, even if surrounded by controversy, were up, have had to fall, therefore changing the commemorative and affective layer of our cities, mainly in Europe and the US. This responds to the Roman legal concept of the damnatio memoriae, or the punishment of memory, that philosopher Diego Garrocho has so cleverly analyzed in nostalgic terms. The damnatio memoriae consisted of, among other things, beheading statues so as to condemn the memory of those that were not considered memorable anymore. But that's only one way of looking at it. Alternatively, we could say that damnatio memoriae consisted of precisely ensuring that those people were remembered, just not in that authoritative or dignified manner anymore. Let's not forget that looking at a statue generally means looking up to it. So memory, as well as nostalgia, is indeed a double-edged sword. I think it's precisely because of its ambivalence, precisely its ambivalence that makes of nostalgia an ever so interesting subject. Its dual nature makes it impossible to exhaust. It is as much about the past as it is about the future. It is as much about joy as it is about trauma, about remembrance and about forgetting, about regression and about progress, and it's about reality as much as it is about fantasy. We don't quite know if the nostalgic person is emotionally weak or intellectually noble and sensitive, but something that we do know, as our panelists will further advance, is that nostalgia is as much a matter of time as it is a matter of space. And that has to be highlighted in the context of this conference. It's about space, though. It's about the common places that we find etymologically in the topos of utopia and retrotopia. Now, for the algia in nostalgia, it's common to say fibromyalgia or neuralgia, all painful pathologies, which emphasizes even further that the condition of the nostalgic person is, quoting Svetlana Boym, that of a troubled imagination who lives in a romance with their own fantasies. As other aspects of our psyche, nostalgia, like irony, for example, makes us human. Other species have shown great memory capacities, but we can't be so sure that, say, an elephant can yearn for the past. And anybody who's had a pet operated on has probably been marveled by how fast they recover. In fact, not being aware of one's traumas to begin with is without a doubt the best way to move on from them. Longing as a form of pathological attachment does for sure boycott healing, and that nostalgia boycotts progress is a recurrent critique of the concept. Personally, I am drawn to nostalgia because the more I think about it, the more I realize that almost everything we do is related to it in some way or another, or some level or another. Like I said, some say that nostalgia stops innovation. However, why should we avoid reminiscing on our past experiences when that knowledge may be exactly what we need to come up with new strategies? Nostalgia can also be a form of creative thinking. Ancient Greek philosophy taught us that learning is recognizing, that learning is remembering, an idea that sounds very powerfully in my head every time that I take one well-known itinerary in a city at the expense of discovering something new, the same way that sometimes I don't feel like listening to new music and I rather look for the comfort of the familiar. And that choice, I think, can bring about its own revelations. Having preset walks that almost become ritualistic is a way of reconnecting with the city after a period of absence and remembering and learning again what it feels like to be there and who we were when we last visited. The Urban Nostalgia Conference is based on the idea that personal the personal trails that punctuate the city are often shaped by sonic and musical experiences, and that likewise musical pieces evoke such itineraries and capture in themselves part of the lost urban atmosphere. This way, during the 3 afternoons that are going to follow, we are using music as an oblique strategy to study the shaping of collective memory, and we are theorizing cities as the backdrop, as the repository, and even as co-creators of such memories. Collective memory, let's recall, is distinct from history in the central role that identity formation plays in it. If individually produced music eventually becomes a vehicle of collective feelings and emotions, it is thanks of its blurring into a social atmosphere, as written by Richard Elliot at the very beginning of his book on Portuguese fado. City and song bear witness to each other. An asset of the conference, I think, is its wide time and space frame. One of the goals here is to delve deeper into the distinct manifestations of nostalgia across cultures and across the 19th and the 20th century. By focusing on both centuries, it's my hope that we may better understand the changing perceptions of time and progress. Jean Starobansky proposed that in the 19th century, nostalgia was closely embedded in collective memory and in the nation-building process of the Romantic era, whereas in the last century, in the 20th, nostalgia became privatized. Perhaps we could say in 2020 terms, it was locked down in one's home and individual self or consciousness. While that happened, nostalgia also became less associated with place and more with time, according to geographer Alastair Bonnet. And on the other hand, the perceptions of the psychological effects of city living also changed from one century to the other. If in the 19th century, the nostalgic urban dweller was longing for an escape into an unspoiled nature, in the 20th century, the city itself becomes an endangered ecosystem that needs to be protected. As you know, it was in the 17th century when the word nostalgia was coined by Swiss doctor Johannes Hofer to refer to a particular mental condition of soldiers. But by the 1850s, nostalgia had become a literary topos, an artistic commonplace. The rationale of this conference argues that due to the shifting temporality of memory made possible by music listening and by the affective affordances of musical works, these are a repository of the nostalgic cartographies of the musical past. A French author and emotional cartographer that I have studied in some depth, Pierre Macorlan, once said indeed that he didn't see the point in writing his autobiography because he already owned a record collection. Indeed, historical artifacts are often thought of as the record of the past, and Pierre Nora's Lieu de Mémoire is a reference that you probably are all very familiar with, emphasizes the materiality of the memory trace of the recording. Most of the papers in the Urban Nostalgia Conference fall within the era of recording, so we may as well rephrase that and say that during these 3 afternoons, we're thinking of memory as a musical record, thinking of our subjects walking in the city as if following the grooves of a vinyl record. As recalled by Simon Reynolds, recording is what ultimately created the possibilities for retro. And on the other hand, I cannot stop thinking that when we sing the nostalgic songs that this conference explores, we are longing for the past and enjoying that daydream reverie about our urban past or about innermost past experiences, while the musical momentum is driving us forward. So we are in the impossible situation of being drawn in opposing temporal lines that lets the experience of the present slip through our fingers. Cities also afford specific experiences of time. When we confront the slowness and the tediousness of the urban ennui, to the accelerating rhythms of urban modernity so mechanically exploited by the cinematic genre of the city symphony, for instance. The Baudelarian spleen is about the contemplative and playful exploration of the fugitive cityscapes. The surrealists tried to get a feel of the urban unconsciousness. The avant-garde is indeed that kind of art believed to be out of its time or ahead of it, to be precise. And yet the avant-garde and nostalgia go hand in hand. If, for example, we quote Svetlana Boym again, among others, saying how the 20th century began with the historical avant-garde, say futuristic intonat rumori, and then it ended, especially after the 1970s, with a craze for revivalism. Musicscapes, which is one of the concepts that I propose we explore further during these afternoons, are very powerful, affective asset of the memory building process that gives rise to urban identities. I hope that the conference will shed some light on the question of how might we revisit compositions, correspondence, novels, music criticism, etc., as techniques of urban nostalgia. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the conference very much. Thank you.